Well, first, Temer out.
Temer out!
Okay, what's Temer out?
Temer out! Okay. Temer out!
It's necessary to say Temer out because there was a coup of state, institutional coup of state in Brazil, and a phantom, a ghost around America Latina, Europe, the fascismus, okay? And my first word is Temer out. Well, I would like to thank you all, especially Nora, Hatzel, Gianna Molinari, the women from Transform Europe, Berlin Institute of Critical Theory, and the Rosa Luxemburgo Foundation for the invitation to be here today. It's a pleasure stay with Entia, Ana Gonzalez and Kayati. It's a great pleasure and a special opportunity to know many feminist and Marxist women researchers and to discuss some points about trade union feminism in Brazil with all of you. I'm glad as well to listen some comments from Gayatri. It's a great pleasure to meet you today. I'm sorry I can't speak English fluently, so I read my presentation about women in Brazil's trade union movement. The objectives of my communication are to analyze the women's performance at the Brazilian trade unionism in the last decades scenario, to present Brazilian activist women's main struggles, forms of action, and claims in the trade union movement, and finally, to indicate some structural and ideological limits of trade union feminism in Brazil. I will list some hypotheses. The considerable participation of women in trade unionism is a growing phenomenon in Brazil. Between 1998 and 2006, the participation of women in the labor market in Brazil grew 37%. Nevertheless, at the same period, the number of women workers affiliated to some unions grew 69%. In 1998, women represented 35% of all workers associated to some unions. In 2013, women represented to 43%. However, on average, women earn 30% less than men. In Brazil, until the 80s, most of the studies on the labor movement ignored the female presence, relegating women to marginal positions, both in the establishment of the working class and in the trade union movement. Women were, in fact, more invisible than absent. This perspective began to change when the composition of the labor market was modified and new characters walked onto the stage, including a trade union trend called for us new trade unionism, which was active, responsible for the biggest strikes wave in the world at the end of the 80s. In the 70s, women's struggle arose, guided by the belief that the union action directed to the working class should consider not only the productive relations, but also the reproductive ones. With the support of the progressive Catholic Church, women start to organize by creating nurseries in the poor neighborhoods, essential condition for their economic independence. Finally, women, mothers, daughters, grandmothers, many of them left-wing activists during the military regime, started a campaign in favor of the political amnesty. According to Magda Neves, women would become, therefore, a distinguished segment of working class. Women's access to industrial work occurred in the form of excluded insertion because they occupied the less qualified functions and had fewer opportunities to occupational mobility. In the late 70s, women's rights activism appeared in a more organized way by the first Congress of Metallurgical Female Workers in São Bernardo do Campo, a city near São Paulo. When the female workers discussed the governmental proposal of night work's abolishment, claimed for nursery in the workplace, denounced the harassment of managers as well as wage inequality. The experience of female metallurgicals spread to the other trade unions, regions of the country, and it was embodied in a wider movement with grassroots nature around the political regime democratization. Research shows that in the path of activist women there are references to feminist movements, as well as the Catholic Church, with which, under influence of liberation theology, encourage the debate on the liberation of oppression, as well as the political and autonomous participation. The contact between Central Workers' Union, CUT, in Portuguese CUT, a federation, the contact between Central Workers' Union women's and the progressive feminist organizations, especially academic ones, was crucial for the female trade union activists to start reflecting on their condition and fight for their rights. However, this relationship between academic feminism and feminist workers doesn't happen without conflicts. Part of the workers were resistant to some of the questions brought up, particularly by the academic feminists, such as abortion, contraception, sexuality. The superior attitude of some academic feminists gave them the reputation of the owners of the truth among women who took part in grassroots organizations. The workers began to claim greater participation in trade unions through the creation of feminine departments. In general, research indicated that the trade unions had a crucial role in the confrontation of the different forms of exploitation and oppression, although the wide range of claims expressed by women in conferences or along their struggles were reduced to the maternity subject. During the 80s and the early 90s, there was an increase in the debate on gender relations, including broader demands on behalf of working women at the unionist agenda. Among the main outcomes, the most important was the creation in 1986 of the National Commission of Working Women, in Portuguese CNMT, and many women committees in the unions affiliated to the Central Workers Union, in Portuguese CUT. In the 90s, the debate over positive actions in CUT, Central Workers Union, became more significant, resulting in the adoption in 1994 of a quota system in which unions were forced to appoint women in at least 30% of union leadership positions. Since 2015, at least 50% of union leadership positions were going to be filled by women. An important change in relation to the 70s was the debate about abortion. In 1991, women from CUT, Central Workers Union, had approved the campaign against the criminalization of abortion. Women from CUT assume that the criminalization of abortion also reflects a class inequality, considering that the majority of women who die from unsafe abortions are poor, black, peasant, housewife, and favela residents. However, the Central Workers Union still remains today resistant to the insertion of the abortion decriminalization among their main battle flags and claims. Well, in Brazil, the abortion is a crime, okay? In the 90s, the implementation of neoliberal policies impacted on the working conditions and the market, which therefore had an effect on the increase of unemployment and informal labor, the decrease in wages, the reduction of rights, outsourcing, etc. In one hand, the advancement of women's participation in the unions is real, as far as it broadens the specific demands of workers in CUT's, Central Workers Unions, discussions. On the other hand, the recession and unemployment force the leadership to take a propositional unionist stand, in which it's necessary to be flexible, pushing women's claims and demands into the background. In the 2000s, since Labour Party came to power, there has been a reconfiguration in class structure. Some political actions implemented by Lula's government impacted on the poorest sectors and historically excluded population. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was our president from 2003 to 2010, as well as one of the main founders of Central Workers Union. Although class inequality in Brazil hasn't been affected, two labor market indicators help us to understand the actions of activist women in this context: the formalization of the labor market and the increase in the minimum wage. Within the debates around the formalization of the labor market and the confrontation of class, race, and gender inequalities, the debate around the domestic job in Brazil have been growing. In 2008, the process of PEC of domestic workers began. PEC is a project of constitutional amendment that aims to ensure equality of treatment between domestic workers and other workers in Brazil. The campaign for regulation of domestic work was headed by feminist women in the National Congress and the National Federation of the Household Workers of CUT. After a dispute in 2015, the household workers obtained the legalization of their rights. The rise to power of the Labour Party produced, in turn, resistance and ruptures in the trade unionism. Outraged with the performance of CUT's Central Workers Union's leadership regarding the social security reform and the labor reform proposed by Lula's government, several unions, especially public servant unions, decided to leave CUT, Central Workers Union. These dissidents created the National Coordination of Struggles, in Portuguese, com lutas, a sui generis organization that aggregates and represents both the unionist movement and the social movements around an anti-neoliberal and socialist project. Com lutas, a far-left union federation, has attracted more and more women. During the first Congress of Com lutas in 2008, 35% of the delegates were women. In 2015, women were 40%. An interesting fact about these women's profile is their marital status. 55% of them were not married. Most women were graduated and post-graduated. The ideological political profile of these women is an important factor to understand their pivotal role in the left-wing trade unionism in Brazil. Among these women, 58% were affiliated to some political party. And within that group, the Unified Socialist Workers' Party, PSTU, was the favorite one. Unified Socialist Workers' Party is a Trotskyist political party. The majority of women had previous political experience, such as attending union meetings and student conferences. Com lutas women are very active in the way they engage with the unionist movement. They created, in 2008, the Fighting Women's Movement, aiming to spread the feminist agenda inside Com lutas. Although the Fighting Women's Movement is a movement inside a left federation union with a socialist program under the influence of Marxist and Trotskyist ideas, our research shows that the diffusion of feminist agenda on the affiliated unions doesn't always happen. In conclusion, which obstacles have blocked greater activism of women in trade union movement? I will list some hypotheses. First, the use of female work was controversial and undervalued. Well, the female work is used by capital as a strategy to reduce the cost of labor in general and to compete with the men's work. Second, the position occupied by women in the labor market, low-skilled jobs and precarious jobs in small business are, in my opinion, are structural limits to activism because activism requires a more stable insertion. Third, the deep inequality in the division of domestic work between men and women, especially in Brazil. The lack of value of domestic work, work at home, childcare, enhances the difficulties that activist women have when taking on trade union political tasks, in addition to the double shift paid work plus domestic work. The idea that the trade union isn't a place for women. This idea promotes mistrust of the female workers on the union and therefore their enclosure in the domestic space. The claims of women are often seen as secondary or even diversionist. The unions hardly organize themselves to guarantee material conditions for the development of activist women's work. There is as well a dominant view in several unions of far left that the specific women's claims would break the unity of the class. An important part of the trade union female activists were mostly politically formed by the progressive sectors of Catholic Church, and less under the influence of libertarian, and socialist or communist ideas. In conclusion, it has been noted that women are organizing themselves within the trade union movements. This struggle is not carried on without contradictions because beyond the conflict against capital, land, industrial, commercial, or financial, women face the domination in the patriarchal capitalist society. Okay, thank you.